Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 99. Chapter 99. Going along the corridor, the assistant led Rostov to the officers' wards, consisting of 3 rooms, the doors of which stood open. There were beds in these rooms, and the sick and wounded officers were lying or sitting on them. Some were walking about the rooms in hospital dressing gowns. The first person Rostov met in the officer's ward was a thin little man with one arm, who was walking about the first room in a nightcap and hospital dressing gown, with a pipe between his teeth. Rostov looked at him, trying to remember where he had seen him before. "See where we've met again," said the little man. Tushin, don't you remember? Who gave you a life at Schöngrabern? And I've been a bit cut off, you see," he went on with a smile, pointing to the empty sleeve of his dressing gown. "Looking for Vasily Dmitriev Denisov, my neighbor," he added, when he heard who Rostov wanted. "Here, here." And Tushin led him into the next room, from whence came sounds of several laughing voices. "How can they laugh, or even live at all here?" thought Rostov, still aware of that smell of decomposing flesh that had been so strong in the soldiers' ward, and still seeming to see fixed on him those envious looks which had followed him out from both sides, and the face of that young soldier with eyes rolled back. Denisov lay asleep on his bed, with his head under the blanket, though it was nearly noon. "Ah, Rostov, how are you?" he called out. Still the same voice as in the regiment, but Rostov noticed sadly that under this habitual ease and animation, some new, sinister, hidden feeling showed itself in the expression of Denisov's face, and in the intonations of his voice. His wound, though a slight one, had not yet healed even now, 6 weeks after he had been hit. His face had that same swollen pallor as the faces of the other hospital patients. But it was not this that struck Rostov. What struck him was that Denisov did not seem glad to see him, and smiled at him unnaturally. He did not ask about the regiment, nor about the general state of affairs, and when Rostov spoke of these matters, he did not listen. Rostov even noticed that Denisov did not like to be reminded of the regiment, or in general, of that other free life which is going on outside the hospital. He seemed to try to forget that old life, and was only interested in the affair with the commissariat officers. On Rostov's inquiry as to how the matter stood, he at once produced from under his pillow a paper he had received from the commission, and the rough draft of his answer to it. He became animated when he began reading his paper, and specially drew Rostov's attention to the stinging rejoinders he made to his enemies. His hospital companions, who had gathered around Rostov, a fresh arrival from the world outside, gradually began to disperse as soon as Denisov began reading his answer. Rostov noticed by their faces that all those gentlemen had already heard the story before, and more than once, and were now tired of it. Only the man who had the next bed, a stout Uhlan, continued to sit on his bed, gloomily frowning and smoking a pipe, and little one-armed Tushin still listened, shaking his head disapprovingly. In the middle of the reading, the Uhlan interrupted Denisov. "But what I say is," he said, turning to Rostov, "it would be best simply to petition the Emperor for pardon. They say great rewards will now be distributed, and surely a pardon would be granted." "Me petition the Emperor?" exclaimed Denisov, in a voice to which he tried hard to give the old energy and fire, but which sounded like an expression of irritable impotence. What for? If I were a wobber, I would ask mercy, but I'm being court-martialed for bringing wobbers to book. Let them twy me. I'm not afraid of anyone. I've served the Tsar and my country honorably, and have not stolen. And I am to be degraded? Listen, I'm writing to them straight. This is what I say. If I had robbed the treasury... It's certainly well written, said Tushin, but that's not the point, Vasily Dmitritch. And he turned also to Rostov. One has to submit, and Vasily doesn't want to. You know, the auditor told you it was a bad business. Well, let it be bad, said Denisov. The auditor wrote out a petition for you, continued Tushin, and you ought to sign it, and ask this gentleman to take it. No doubt he, indicating Rostov, has connections on the staff. You won't find a better opportunity. Haven't I said I'm not going to grovel? Denisov interrupted him and went on reading his paper. Rostov had not the courage to persuade Denisov, though he instinctively felt that the way advised by Tushin and the other officers was the safest, and though he would have been glad to be of service to Denisov. He knew his stubborn will and straightforward, hasty temper. When the reading of Denisov's virulent reply, which took more than an hour, was over, Rostov said nothing, and he spent the rest of the day in a most dejected state of mind amid Denisov's hospital comrades, who had gathered around him, telling him what he knew and listening to their stories. Denisov was moodily silent all the evening. Late in the evening, when Rostov was about to leave, he asked Denisov whether he had no commission for him. Yes, wait a bit, said Denisov, glancing round at the officers, and taking his papers from under his pillow, he went to the window where he had an inkpot and sat down to write. It seems it's no use knocking one's head against the wall, he said, coming from the window and giving Rostov a large envelope. In it was the petition to the Emperor drawn up by the auditor, in which Denisov, without alluding to the offenses of the commissariat officials, simply asked for pardon. Hand it in, it seems. He did not finish, but gave a painfully unnatural smile. All right, so that concludes my reading of Chapter 99. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 99. When King Laugh come, but only for some. It is a strange world, a sad world, a world full of misery and woes and troubles, and yet, when King Laugh come, he make them all dance to the tune he play. These are the words of Dr. Van Helsing of Bram Stoker's Dracula. He speaks these words during a particularly depressing moment when, after the death of a good friend, it looks as if his vampire hunting endeavor will certainly fail. We're at a similar moment in Nicholas Rostov's story. He has just visited the soldiers' ward of the dilapidated Prussian hospital where he went in search of his friend Denisov. What he found instead was a scene of total carnage, composed of death, disease, and various stages of human decomposition. Moving on to the officers' ward, however, he's greeted by none of that. Quite the contrary. His first impression there is the sound of laughter. Rostov finds this extremely odd, given that while the conditions here are much better, still the stench of human rot wafts into the room from the adjacent soldiers' ward. Here in the officers' ward, there is very little of the despair that permeates the soldiers' ward. Instead, we have convalescence proper, even debate. Indeed, when Rostov finally locates Denisov, he finds that Denisov has been engaged in a long talk with his officer comrades about the right way to respond to his court-martial. You'll recall that Denisov has borrowed from the army provisions line to feed his own men. Most of the officers insist that Denisov beg pardon of the emperor, as the auditor has suggested he do. The auditor has even drawn up a document requesting the pardon. All are confident the emperor will grant it. Denisov, however, remains unmoved. He believes he has done nothing wrong. He shouts he will not act dishonorably and requests the pardon. But then he takes Rostov aside and secretly hands him the auditor's document, asking him to please deliver it to the emperor for consideration. Rostov's thinking on this matter is very interesting. He believes Denisov should take the auditor's advice. This is a somewhat radical departure from Rostov's character so far. 2 days ago, we discussed how the hardships endured during Rostov's second tour of duty have started to change him. We see that here. Previously, he has been unwilling to rely on the familial connections to further his career. Unlike his friend Boris Drubetskoy, he has preferred to go it alone. But today he thinks to himself that if he were Denisov, he would take the auditor's letter and request a pardon of the emperor. While Rostov's character development is very important in our readings, I'd like to focus on something else for our meditation today. During our reading of War and Peace, we focused quite a bit on the importance of a certain species of egalitarianism and cosmopolitanism. These past 2 chapters show what can happen when these principles are violated. Consider the horrid nature of the soldiers' ward yesterday, and contrast it with what we find in the officers' ward today. This differing treatment of individuals based on social distinction, the soldier versus the officers, runs contrary to the stoically informed philosophy of A Year of War and Peace. Daily meditation. The idea of a polity in which there is the same law for all, a polity administered with regard to equal rights and equal freedom of speech, and the idea of a kingly government which respects most of all the freedom of the governed. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 99. I hope you liked it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are below. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 100. I hope you join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.